I, oh, okay, never mind. I'm going to start over. Now that we're recording so that people who are not here live can watch this. My name is Sarah. I'm also known as Sarah the Pivoter. Some of you may or may not have heard my name before. You might recognize the flight suit. I'm wearing today Girl in Space Club. If you're not familiar, you should definitely go and follow. She's got female flight suits and now a new male line as well that feature a drop seat. So you don't have to take the whole thing off in order to use the restroom, which was a common complaint for women. But men also have needs that could support that functionality as well. So you're welcome. They just released the new photos that we took at South by Southwest to this morning on their website. So that's quite exciting. I can officially say that I am a real space model. Last year at the Analog Astronaut Conference, we did a fashion show, and that was a lot of fun. And we had Cyan's Proctor, her line of clothing, as well as a Girl in Space Club, which was founded by a NASA aerospace engineer. And so it was really cool to showcase the crossover between the engineering, the STEM, the typical what we think of when we think of space, which is an astronaut or an engineer or space physicist, and then highlight the creative side and what you can do when you bring the full self to the table. So that's what we're going to dive into today. I have a short slide deck with some awesome pictures. I had a lot of fun creating this for you guys and girls here today, but we're going to just dive in. But I'd like to get started, and I'd like to have you put in the chat box. Um, what is it that when you think of space, what careers do you think of immediately? Just the first thing that comes to mind. Go ahead and put that in the chat box. I like to do things interactive. And if you're at home watching this recording, think about that. And the first word that comes to mind, I'm pretty sure I'm going to guess that we're going to have things like astronaut, engineer. Yeah, so I see explorers, excitement. Yes, definitely excitement. When I think of space, I get very excited. I'm a kid in a candy store. Breaking boundaries, another thing I am a huge fan of. If you ever meet me or follow any of my work, you will know that I do not play inside a box. I break them, make them bigger, and then tell people that it doesn't actually exist. So, some existential philosophical ideas for you today. Scientist, engineer, yes. So, we typically think of the STEM careers. We don't often think about all of the things that we need in order to support those roles. We also don't think about the things that make business function, like legal structure, uh, accountants, sales, marketing, basic management, pricing, analytics. There are a lot of functions that can cross over from other industries, and it doesn't have to be, if you're an accountant, you're an accountant. A number is a number. Math is exact, and that's why some people like it. It's also why some people do not like it very much. And why, being in the space industry, some of you might have thought, oh, well, I don't really like math. I don't really want to do complex equations. And so you wrote it off as something that's not for you. And I'm here to tell you that we get to play in a lot of different ways now. The space industry has evolved a lot since you might have looked at it last. All right. Now, if you could do anything in the space industry with what you know now, what is it that you think you'd like to do? I'm going to ask this question again at the end. We'll see if we've shifted any minds or inspired any new thoughts. But go ahead and put that in the chat box. And if you're watching the recording, write that down for yourself so you can compare your answer at the end of the session to the beginning. And I will tell you that my first thing that I wanted in space was, of course, the very typical be an astronaut. And I still want that. And it's still going to happen. I'm still going to make that happen in some form or fashion, which is now much more possible and easy than it might have been when I first thought of that over 30 years ago. But now I am in the space industry already, and I am doing things in a much different capacity than I ever thought. For example, I'm here talking to all of you, delivering a talk on space careers. So I'm a mentor. I'm also an MC and host of events. I work actually with Diane, who you might see in the audience, at an events company that does a lot of space launches and different programs and conferences for the space industry. So that's extremely exciting. And I get to do training and workshops with people in space, aviation, and AI, just to name a few industries. Okay, so we see engineers, scientists. These are great goals. These are great things that you might find yourself in, and you might find it evolve.
Hey Sarah, I'm not seeing your slides.
I'm not sharing them yet.
Okay.
Yeah. I always like to start talks by just connecting and having a chat first, but I am going to share them now. You caught me right as I was about to hit share screen, so your intuition went off. No problem. All right. All right. So you might recognize the flight suit that I'm currently wearing. That's there. I like to call myself a space communicator. I'm a leadership trainer. I work with C-suite executives and mid-level managers across industries doing workshops on communication. How do we build trust? How do we work between departments? And how do we create momentum so that our businesses are here for the long term, that they're sustainable? And now a cosmic career guide because we are going off planet, and that is going to be our future. So we have a lot of myths around the space industry, and the reality is that, I've already mentioned a few things, but we even need things like wellness coaches. If you think about mindset, especially in a space environment, whether you're actually out in space or you're here on Earth and you're supporting some of the roles, we need to have a healthy well-being for ourself as a person, as a human being, as well as our teams and our communities. So we're going to need people to guide us through that, particularly as we continue to navigate very complex environments. The regulations are changing. The way that the general public looks at and interacts with the space industry is shifting. The amount of private funding is shifting. Traditionally speaking, it was very largely a government-funded program and not something that the average citizen might have had access to unless they lived near a launch center. Now we have the advent of cell phones, technology like this, which allows us to communicate without being in the same physical place, including communication with our astronauts when they are up in the stratosphere, in low Earth orbit, and beyond. We also need designers, and I'm not just talking about designers of rocket ships. I'm also talking about designers of spacesuits, designers of our habitats, designers of the equipment that's going to work in a different environment than what we currently are used to. And for that, that's going to require quite a lot of different skill sets. So the opportunity here is enormous. And this is a reminder why this session is part of the Space Education Day is because we want to make sure that everyone who is interested in space, one, recognizes that they belong, and two, understands how their current skill sets are able to be transferred over, as well as some of the things that they can consider if they weren't aware of it before and how they can develop themselves in order to get to those targets. Also, I will throw out there if you ever have any questions throughout the talk, you can go ahead and ask them, and then the moderator and I will make sure that we get to them uh, in this hour session. All right, so the big picture. Some of you may have seen this information before. It's about a $1.8 trillion economy of value with the space economy by 2035. Now, this is by McKinsey and Company. If you do a quick Google search or ask ChatGPT, you're going to get very similar numbers by all the major consulting firms because we have a huge amount of infrastructure that relies on things in space, aka satellites, what you see in the picture here. We have five major sectors, which are expected to be 60% of that total value, and that's listed there on the right. That's supply chain and transport, food and beverage, state-sponsored defense. You might notice a C there because I use British spelling, so I am going to highlight that. Retail, consumer and lifestyle, and digital communications. Also, with AI and the technology advances that we're facing, even today, end of May 2025, technology has already advanced drastically since January 2025. And this rate of change is going to continue to expand and evolve over time. It's also going to change how we show up in the workplace, not just as how we show up as engineers, scientists, people using tools, people using computers, Zoom technologies, etc., but also how we interact with each other, where we go to find information, and how we develop ourselves to get to the next level. And I like to highlight this because I remember when I was 5 years old and I asked my teacher why I needed to learn math. And she told me that I needed to learn math because I wouldn't have a calculator in my pocket. And at some point, I might have to do math, like when I was buying something at the store and I needed the right change, something along those lines. And now I like to always giggle and say, well, now I do have a calculator in my pocket. So take that. And it just goes to show how different the world is from when we first start our journeys and where we are going to end up decades into the future. And what we think of now as possible is just the tip of the iceberg. When we start to think about what is coming next, it's hard to imagine because it's so gargantuan. It's like a big black hole of possibility. And so, what I like to reframe for people, because there's a lot of what if thinking, what if typically frames things in a more negative light, right? Like, well, what if this goes wrong? And what if this happens? What if that satellite smashes into another one and then now we're all stuck here because there's too much space debris? A great reframe and a great catalyst for innovation and for creative thinking is imagine if, because that taps into the more positive side and it really allows you to think of solutions that were previously in the dark, previously not accessible because you were focused on the problem. Imagine if is what it allows us to focus on the solution. So if there's anything that you currently see as a problem, I call that an opportunity. And we have endless possibilities to solve and work together for these opportunities. And as you can see, there's going to be a lot of focus here in the next coming years. So this is going to be an excellent place for you to spend time and educate yourselves on what is coming and where you can spend your time, not just in terms of investment financially, but your energy and your focus. And finding the right career really is determined by a few things: your personality, where you thrive. Some people are extremely extroverted, like me, and some people are more introverted. I love to go to events and be around people. Other people need a lot of extra downtime to support that energy output. So, understanding how you best operate, what allows you to bring your best self to the table, will allow you to pick a sector and a position and a skill set to start looking at so that you can take advantage of this $1.8 trillion value that is coming. Now, the future of the space economy, there's a few other reports that McKinsey has done. They've got something called the 550. I'll be sharing all the links of where I've gotten this information and the resources with this deck at the end so that you can go and do your own research as well. But you can see that there's also some very mature industries that have existed for a very long time, like pharmaceuticals, even things like our beauty and personal care, what we're using in our day-to-day lives, as well as manufacturing and food and nutrients. Now, a lot of this people don't know. If you're in this room, you might have an idea, but a lot of our technological advances when it comes to things like nutrition, as well as things like our cell phone, diapers, baby formula, all of these things have come from our space exploration. The studies that we've done on the ISS, the things that we have learned because we have been in space. And so the conversation that we also need to have and understand within our communities and our peers is that this is not an or conversation, it's an and conversation because Earth is in space. So we're already in space. We just happen to be on a big, giant rock of a spaceship called planet Earth. And when we can shift our thinking into that, that's actually systems thinking. And we start to understand how we're just a piece of a greater whole. This also allows us to look at how our existing industries are a piece of a greater whole and how we can start to find those connection points. Also, another thing that most people don't think about, which I'm very aware of from my background in aviation, is the radiation levels that we would get exposed to as we begin to spend more time in space. So, as things like space tourism become a very real reality, as we have more people going into space, whether that's for extended experimentation or shorter trips, there are going to be impacts on the human body, on physiology, on mental health and well-being that we don't yet know and that we don't yet understand. And it'll take us time to develop those programs, to understand those insights. And so it's really important that we also engage and enroll these existing as sectors like manufacturing, like pharmaceuticals, so that they're working with us together, and therefore we're solving the problems together because we're coming at it from different perspectives. And I always like to remind people that when we're very close to something, like in the space industry, we forget what people outside the space industry see and what they experience. If you're in pharmaceuticals, if you're in AI, if you're within a very specific sector, if you're male or female, depending on what sociographic or demographic you grew up in, economically, what country, what culture, etc. All of these things give us a very unique perspective, and that's why it's so important that we work together. And space has always been a wonderful place for things like politics to go to the side while science and the progression of that human exploration is the main focus. So it's important that all of us do our part to continue that narrative and make sure that we're working together. So today we're going to redefine space careers. I'm going to introduce four different archetypes that you can look at and see if you fit within that framework, which are explorer, translator, builder, and supporter. Because once you identify your archetype, you'll be able to start to look at what sector might work the best for you, as well as assessing what are your current existing skills, both the technical and the human capabilities that you have, and what maybe are new things for you, something that you've not really been exposed to yet or even heard of, and how you can start to then direct where you're putting your attention in terms of further education, mentorship, and programs of study. All right, so the explorer archetype, as you might have imagined as we started off this call, is really the bold frontliners. These are the people who have a lot of courage, who are really out there. They're the ones that, they jump 2 feet in first and they ask questions later. They're willing to take the risk that maybe some of us would prefer they do it first and then we can follow after, right? And so these people are very curious. They're usually very mission driven. They're adventurer energy. They always are wanting to go to the new place and try the new thing. You'll usually also find them doing things like skydiving, extreme sports, things that are going to give an adrenaline rush. The key skills for these explorer types are going to be systems thinking. Again, team comms, because they can't do the exploring without an entire team to support them. Risk assessment, being bold is important, but making sure that we're taking the appropriate risk so that we are not wasting resources or potentially putting life at risk, having safety, focus as well. The traditional STEM careers are also going to be key here, as well as problem solving under pressure. Generally speaking, these careers that are going to be more of that explorer type are going to have situations where they will be all alone and they will need to make a decision. So being decisive and confident in your abilities is going to be really critical. And this may not be how you feel right now, and that's okay. These are also things that you can develop through practice. Everything is a practice, and as you get training, you continue to develop and practice that skill set. I can tell you when I was a child, I was painfully shy. And the thought of talking to other people, and especially a group of people, was terrifying. Like for the average human. Most humans are typically more afraid of public speaking than they are of dying. And clearly, I'm here now. I'm not terrified any longer. I am a professional speaker. And so I was able to practice enough where I became confident in my ability and I was able to overcome those initial fears. So this may not be what you're feeling right now, but it doesn't mean that it's inaccessible to you. The traditional career paths that you would expect, astronaut, aerospace engineer, test pilots. There's a lot of aviation and aerospace overlap, flight systems engineer. So as new technology is getting developed, you're there to help test out those flights, make sure you're catching what needs to be caught so that we can then take it into the more risky environment of going to space or other planets. There's also mission specialists, satellite spacecraft mission operators, field astrobiologists, and analog astronauts. Now, you can also be an astrobiologist or a scientist without having to necessarily be in the field, but if you are in the field, you might be in some extreme environments. Analog astronauts, if you're not familiar with this term, is really exciting. I only found out about this 2 years ago. And I'm a huge space nerd. So I have no idea how I missed this. I must have been living under a rock. But when I found out about this, I became really, really excited because essentially what's happening is you are simulating an environment that we might encounter if we're off-world, and you are going through the steps of what you would do to complete your missions. So that might mean that anytime you leave the habitat, you're putting on a full spacesuit. You're going through the exact same steps that you would be going through if you're out on a space station or in a spacecraft. So that you build the muscle memory, you can find where maybe gaps are in the SOPs, those standard operating procedures, so that you can learn what communication is like in a very tight environment. We might all be friends in the same room when we only spend an hour or two with each other, but are we able to communicate effectively and still do our jobs while keeping our mindsets in a healthy place when we are in a confined space for hours, days, months, maybe even years on end? And these are critical skills that will be necessary for us to be able to work together and make discoveries. The second type is the translator archetype, and this is one that I most identify with. These are the meaning makers, communicators, educators, storytellers, and connectors. So these are going to be people in teaching positions, your public speakers, people who are doing PR, marketing, sales, writing up articles about the latest and greatest launch technology. So your journalists, your podcasters, your filmmakers. How do we craft a narrative? How do we tell the story of what's occurring in space so that someone who's outside of the industry understands, so that we can raise money, so that we can get people to tie into the story? Now, this is a skill set and a job that is needed across industry, not just in the space industry. And you might already be doing something like this in your day-to-day experience now. You might have taught in the past, you might have helped interview for an article, come up with a marketing campaign. You might be running a school association, or you might have helped do journalism for your school newspaper. All of these things are skill sets and experience that you can leverage for the space industry. It's about communicating between what seems to be two different worlds and finding that gap, that connection. And by doing so, bringing two different parties together so that they can work together and create more innovation. And so this requires a lot of emotional intelligence. This is often referred to as EQ. So we have IQ, which of course is also very important for space exploration. But EQ, I can tell you right now, is going to be one of your number one skill sets across the board, despite archetype, despite industry, despite age, anything, because it's going to be what enables you to communicate with other humans and in the future non-humans. We already do that with things like our pets and animals at home, and we find a way to communicate non-verbally with them or teach them key words. So emotional intelligence will get you further than any other technical skill set, because if you are aware, situationally aware, and able to pick up on the nuance of what an interaction that is taking place is actually meaning, particularly if different cultures are involved, different generations, then you will be able to help translate and reduce conflict. You will be able to help tell that story that enrolls people into the common vision so that you can get that funding, so you can get that grant, and then you can take things to the next level. It will also be very, very useful in your personal life. It will be the most critical thing with your partners, your spouses, your colleagues, your peers. So I highly encourage everyone to focus on developing their EQ just as much as they are developing their IQ. I was a hiring manager for almost 10 years at the organizations I worked for, and I would always hire for attitude and the willingness to learn, because I can teach you anything technical. That's just a matter of time and application. But what is harder to teach is the attitude of being open to learning and open to seeing different perspectives. That is gold. And if you can bring that to an organization, you're also more agile, which means that you can move between departments, and that adds more value, but it also means that you are future-proof. You are future-proofing yourself because you are able to adapt and learn, which is what organizations must also do in a rapidly changing environment. The third archetype is a builder archetype. Now, these are the people who, as children, were probably taking things apart and putting them back together, or taking a lot of things apart and taking the components and building new things. They often played with Legos. Maybe they were building in software. They were building storyboards. So the builder is really someone who's very visionary in their thinking, and they want to understand how things work. And so that is what drives them. So they're usually into coding, engineering. They're very persistent. If they have an idea in their mind, they don't rest until they figure out why it works, how it works, and then once that's satisfied, they move on to the next project. They're usually extremely detail oriented, and they're also very grounded in the way that they're innovating because they understand the basics of how something works and that this component over here and this component over here, let's say they're gears, if they're not connected, doesn't matter how much oil you add, you'll just make a mess. How do we make sure that they are connected and that when this moves, this moves? So how are the interconnectedness of things, projects, and systems also translates over to that people element I was just speaking about. So when we have the visionaries, they often need to get people to get on board with their crazy ideas, right? They've come up with a concept that seems impossible with the current technology, the current understanding, the current mindset or approach. And they need to communicate their visionary idea in a way that can get someone who's maybe more risk adverse or doesn't fully understand the science to help them make this vision a reality. And this is why that EQ and that communication skill set serves you across the board and will serve you well into the later years of your life. The common career paths here, space simulation, design labs, AI specialist. This is going to be a big one moving forward. Space architect. There's a really cool company here in Austin, Texas called Icon, and they do 3D printing. And they have helped build some habitats for analog missions for NASA, as well as looking at how can they take their technology, for an example, go to the moon and use the materials that already exist on the moon to help them 3D print and build, whether that's the habitat or something else that we might need for growing food, for example. And then that way we're not taking resources from Earth or another location to a site and then spending all of that money on fuel, all that money on transportation and logistics when we can simply use what's already there. Um, Other things that exist, robotics engineering. There's some really exciting or terrifying, depending on how you look at it, advancements in the robotics space right now. Austin has a lot of those Boston the little dogs that are running around. So a lot of people are taking them to the dog parks at the moment, and it's really very fascinating to watch the dogs and other animals interact with this robot. And it's something that they don't understand. It's new to them, so of course they're very wary. And so that's another space where if you're a builder, that could be really a really fun space for you to operate in. And of course, we wouldn't do any of these things without our support teams. And so I always like to celebrate the support teams, the hidden heroes, the ones that are in a boardroom, nothing too glamorous, nothing very sexy. They're behind a computer, but they are the reason why the all the other archetypes and the explorers, the ones who usually get the spotlight, are able to do the things that they do. My background in aviation, I was running a dispatch control center. So think of mission control, but for airplanes. And we had an entire team of dispatchers behind the scenes to help make sure that those aircraft and the pilots of those aircraft and the flight crew had what they needed in order to have a successful mission. And this is really the soul of the entire system. And these are the people who are shaping the culture, making sure that we have strategic innovations, that we're communicating well, and also the people that are going to government and speaking about policy, making sure that the laws that we need to either protect the industry and or to support future growth are being looked at and having important conversations. Project managers that are going to remember that a project is not just systems and steps, but also the human component. How are we getting people to work together So this is also including things like our HR, our workplace development, how we're training the next generation of leaders, making sure that people understand how what they do in their day-to-day job affects the rest of the organization, as well as affects the rest of the industry. A lot of times the narrative stops at, well, this is my job, this is all that I do, and that's all I have to focus on. But there is a domino effect, and it's a ripple effect. So, what you do impacts your team, which impacts your organization, which impacts the industry. And so, we all have a very important role. No matter what our archetype is, there will be some support as well. And how we show up, who you're being day to day, and how you're showing up as an individual is going to impact the rest of all of these sectors. And if you think about that $1.8 trillion value that is the future, then that is going to be impacted by all of us now, as well as the next generations coming through. So we want to do what we can to have human factors expertise, making sure that we're focusing on the psychology aspect. What are the things that are going to be different? How will the brain be different when it's grown up in a completely digital world versus analog? How will we relate to things? How will we have downtime? If a lot of the kind of menial, more time-consuming manual labor tasks are no longer something that we need to focus on, where do we put that energy? And what we can do is we can focus on the very human element because no matter what technology we develop, we are still human and we will still require certain things. And so creating psychological safety in the workplace, making sure that we're designing systems that are not just important for this year or the next 5 years, but the next 50, the next 500, the generational thinking. One of our big space educators that's commonly talked about, referred by, is Mariba. Mariba Jah. He's also lectures at UT, and he's got some amazing new projects that he's designing, but he always talks about the generational thinking. And if that's something that inspires you, I also recommend you check out the Long Now Foundation. The Long Now Foundation is all about the future and why we should care about it and what we can do in our day-to-day actions to think about that future and make sure that that's part of the equation when we're solving problems. Because right now we're solving a current problem, not a future problem. And when we shift the focus, then we can work backwards and we're solving something that's out here that's greater than just the individual or the team or the organization. So we're going to again need a lot of EQ, a lot of leadership, which includes self-leadership. Now, some of you on this call are a little bit younger in age. Maybe you don't have a lot of work experience, and none of that matters. I'm here to tell you that you're already a leader. You're already a leader because you're leading yourself day to day and you're leading others around you. And you may not recognize it yet, but you are because the people around you are looking to you to see how you show up and how you do your work and what you represent. And you may not realize that you're inspiring them or giving them permission to be. And so I encourage you to continue to work on really getting to know yourself and bringing your full self to the table. If you like to play Dungeons and Dragons, tell people about it. If you like to go scuba diving, tell people about it. If you like to write poetry, tell people about it. I watched Dr. Sian Proctor's speech at a conference, and she talked about how her poem helped her win a seat to space. And I hadn't written poetry at that point in time, this was a couple of years ago, for about a decade, because I had to be an important business person who focused on, all of the technical things and all the project skill sets that I needed. I was reading a lot of productivity books and a lot of books on, how to do things faster and be more effective and how to connect with people. But I forgot about how to connect with myself. And so she really inspired me to come back to poetry. And doing that has opened up an entire world for me of a different way of thinking, a remembrance of how I can give words and give meaning to something that is really abstract, but put it into a context that others might understand and really connect to the heart of what it means to be human, of what it means to be an explorer. And so I started writing poetry again. And I told her, and she inspired me to start writing one poem a day. I did that for a year. And I now write whenever I feel inspired. And I got my first published poem at New Worlds, and I was able to share that. And I believe, Ron, I believe you were there for that one. And that was really exciting. And a little story about that was I signed up for the Austin Poetry Society. And they have these emails that go out every once in a while, these little competitions, right? And one day I just saw a competition that was for a poem about the moon. And I was like, well, I love the moon. I'm a big space geek and I love poetry. Okay, I can write about the moon. So I wrote this poem, I submitted it, and I didn't think twice about it. Some time goes by, I forgot that I applied for this thing, and I get an email. And the email says, we're so sorry. Thank you for your submission, but you weren't selected. And I went, oh, okay. Well, I like my poem. No problem. I'll write something else another time and try again. And about 2 days later, it hit me that, wow, that's the first time I didn't make myself wrong because I didn't win something, and that I was able to appreciate that that poem was still valuable because it meant something to me. And as I was having this realization, it was like a Friday, 4 p.m., my computer makes the sound for an email, which shouldn't happen because most of my devices are always on silent. So it shocked me, and I was like, "Oh, why is that on?" I was about to get on a call, so I made sure everything was back on silent, and I opened the email, and it's an email from the submission saying, "We're so sorry, we sent you the wrong email. Actually, you were accepted, and your poem will be published in November." And I just was sitting there a little dumbfounded, like, "Wow, that's incredible." It's almost like, and you can take this with a grain of salt, but it's almost like the universe just needed me to do it for me rather than do it for somebody else. And then it all came together. And the best part of that was then I got asked to present my poem at New Worlds, and I got to present it on stage. So not only did it get published, but I was able to perform it and share it in a very powerful way. And so I share that story because I want to encourage you to follow your passions, follow those creative projects, those pursuits, those things that you can't stop thinking about. Don't let anyone tell you that it's not valuable or that it's not worthwhile, because it absolutely is. And it also develops you as an individual. And a little bit like Mr. Miyagi, wax on, wax off, for those of you who have seen The Karate Kid, either the original or the remake, you're developing skills in a way that may not seem obvious to you right now, but absolutely will be valuable later on down the line. And you might ask me, well, Sarah, why is poetry important in the space industry? And I'll tell you why. Because if we're going to enroll other people in this big, beautiful dream that we have, we need to connect to the heart and soul of what it means to be human. And the only way we can do that is through the arts. And some people definitely connect through spreadsheets. I don't know who they are, they're crazy. I respect them a lot, but definitely I run away from spreadsheets. And yet, that is also a creative process, right? And so, being able to communicate and think in a nonlinear way, and like, how do I draw these abstract things together? Now you're developing a muscle that when you're sitting in front of your computer and you're looking at some code, or you're in a lab and you're looking at this science experiment going, this doesn't make sense. All of a sudden, you're going to have a realization of this other experiment you did, and this other program that you wrote, and this other conversation that you had. And your brain is going to be able to put them all in the same room together and come up with something new. That if you were following a very linear process of only what's been done before and step by step, you might miss. So I encourage you to really explore all of those things so that you can develop the muscle, and also bring your full self to the table, because we need the full self. We don't need siloed selves. The more we are our full selves, the more we'll be able to connect and innovate and create together. All right. Mindsets for the space age. Curiosity. Curiosity, curiosity, curiosity. It is why we're all in this room on this Zoom call. It's why we're in the space industry. But with everything that you do, curiosity is going to be greater than the certainty because the certainty is not what gets us innovation. That curiosity and asking the question and going, imagine if this is really how we're going to create new possibilities. And not just technologically, but for jobs, for careers. By you talking about something that you are passionate about, and by you asking a lot of questions, you might even create an opportunity for yourself. For example, a job that doesn't exist yet, but the company is going through massive growth. And now all of a sudden, you're having a conversation with a key decision maker and you're asking them questions. And through that conversation, they're learning about you and they're learning about your personality and what your skill set is. And then you drop the line in there of, I'm really interested in coding. I've been doing it since I was 5. And now with AI, I've built this and that. And this person goes, oh my gosh, we need you. We don't have a position yet, but we absolutely need you. And you're going to help us build this thing. And nothing ever went out to the public sphere. I bet if you talk to any of the people who've been in the industry for a while on this call in any of the sessions, Ron, Mark, Diane, anybody else that's leading, Frank White, they will have a story like that where they had a conversation and then they were able to create an opportunity. Diane and I have had that also just in the last month alone through talking about what we're interested in and what opportunities we see for the future. And we were able to link some things together that seemingly would never make sense to be connected, but somehow they do. And it's leading us down some new exciting paths of exploration. Adaptability. I'm not called Sarah the Pivoter for no reason. Being adaptable is a skill set. Being agile is something that is important, but it's also about your mindset. It's about how quickly can you be open to a new concept and also realize that both things are true. A lot of things in life are in isolation. This one is true, and in isolation, this is true. Maybe they don't both exist at the same time, but both truths can exist at the same time. So making sure that you're open to coaching, you're open to learning new things, and that you are able to navigate, and that requires the mental resiliency, and a really great tool for figuring out, what that you do have resilience is to write a resiliency list. And so what that is what are the major things you've lived through? And I'm not just talking about COVID, but I'm talking about your personal life. What are some big events that were pretty disruptive? Now, maybe you moved a lot as a kid or right before high school. Maybe your parents went through a divorce, you went through a divorce, maybe you lost someone really close to you. Make a list of all of those things that you've been through because you're now here on the other side. And as you look at that list, think about what it was like during that time and what really helped you. Maybe you'll find a pattern of a particular tool or a particular person that you were able to leverage and use to help you through that difficult period. Maybe you'll notice that at different types of situations, you utilize different tools like meditation, exercise. Maybe there was a particular mentor that's consistent, or for different topics, a different person, because this is going to help you identify your toolkit of what already exists for you. And now you can go and leverage that the next time something that seems really big and insurmountable comes on your plate, you'll be able to go, you know what? I can go to person A because they've been there for me in the past and they know how to work with me and they know how to help me navigate this complexity. Or I can go to the gym because I know that in situations like this, I just need to move my body a little bit and blow off some steam. And that is a really great way for you to build your own agile and adaptability kit. Cross-discipline collaboration, understanding that no field works alone, there's always a crossover. So if you have some adjacent interests, start to talk to people about what it's like in their day-to-day life, learn about their roles, learn about those organizations, and see if there's any interesting overlap for you. And then again, finding your purpose. What's your archetype? Where is it that you want to go? Align your heading towards that direction so that you always have a North Star. Now, that North Star doesn't need to be like a very specific job title or direction. It can be broad, but at least it's leading you in a direction that you will take consistent action on, you can gain momentum on. And I always like to remind people, excuse me, that you can always change. You can always pivot. You are under no obligation to stay the same. And in fact, that wouldn't be great because if I think about who I was even last year, let alone when I was 20 years old or 15 years old, if I had stayed the same, I would not have been able to have some of the most incredible experiences that I've had or opportunities. And it really did require me upgrading my mindset and changing my mind. Some of my beliefs that I hold today are not the beliefs I held 20 years ago. And that is okay. A lot of the things that we know to be true today will shift in the next 20 years, particularly in space. So allow yourself to have that purpose, that North Star, but leave room for the pivots, leave room for the meandering, right? A lot of times we're so focused on getting to the peak of the mountain, we forget to stop and look around and enjoy the scenery. That's just as important because in those moments, you'll gain reflection. And in those moments is where you will realize, hey, I like this journey. I'm enjoying this. This is great. I want to keep climbing the mountain. And some of you might go, you know what? This is where I want to be. This right here, this was my end goal, not that other thing. And others of you will go, wow, this sucks. I don't like it at all. I need to get off this mountain as quickly as possible. And now you have the opportunity to do that in a more intentional manner rather than racing up to the top, getting to the top, and realizing the mountain that you wanted to climb is over there. And now you have a lot more work and a lot more effort and a lot more identity shifts to go through than if you had regularly checked in. So, this conversation that we're having today, check in with yourself. Your archetype might shift, your desires might change, and make sure you're doing that at a regular basis so that you keep your finger on the pulse of what's really alive for you. I want you to focus on what makes you feel alive, not what you think you should do, not what you think is successful or will get you the most money, but what makes you feel alive, because that is going to be where you will be willing to put in the time and effort required to become a master. It's where you'll be willing to have the conversations that are harder or to make the bold ask. And I can tell you, you can get a lot of things by asking, simply by asking. And on that note, if any of you have a question, feel free to ask me, whether that's now, we still have about 12 minutes left of the session. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. My website's going to be in this PowerPoint presentation as well. But send me a message, connect, find people that you admire on LinkedIn or Instagram or TikTok or whatever platform you're on. It doesn't matter. But find those people, ask them questions, reach out, ask for coffee. You never know if they'll say yes. You'll never know if they say no until you actually ask them. And another thing that you're doing in the background by asking more frequently is you're building up your resiliency to know and not letting it make or break your world. I can tell you one of the most powerful things you can ever do for yourself is be resilient in the face of a no, because that no is just a redirection. Or maybe it means you get to ask again when you have more skill set or when you have a better pitch. And then when it is the right thing, this person will see your resilience, your dedication, the willingness to show up. I mean, there's an entire movie about an astronaut, I believe Jose Hernandez, who did not take no for an answer, kept showing up to NASA, kept training, and then was able to fulfill his dream of being an astronaut. So don't ever let no deter you. And if you get the opportunity to practice receiving a no, take it. Be as wild and unreasonable in your requests as you can, because you might just get it. And then you might be sitting there going, okay, great, I got the thing. Now what do I do with it? And that's a whole nother conversation. But that is an exciting place to be. Sharing your story. I want to hear your story. I want to know what makes you come alive. I want to know what interests you have, what opportunities you see. There's a lot of podcasts that exist where you can share your story. There's a lot of mentors and mentee programs where you can align with people who will be able to listen to your story and help you share it, help give your voice a voice. There's a lot of platforms where you can learn about EQ in the space industry, like SpaceKind. LifeShip is doing pioneer calls for the more entrepreneurial mindsets. They're also doing artist calls. and bringing together a lot of artists to talk about how art impacts the human experience in the STEM fields. One Space is a new concept that's been born out of Yuri's Night, and we're going to be doing something on June 21st at Kennedy Space Center. If you're in Florida or you're around, we'd love to have you. There's a student rate, and right now a buy one, get one free. But beyond that, it's a community about remembering that all of us, no matter what community we're in space now, if we're on the astronaut side, if we're on the support side, if we're on the marketing side, no matter what company we work for, we are a community of communities. And we have this vision that we can all work together because there is one space for all of us. We're already in it. And so let's come together, let's leverage our resources, let's share, and as a community, take things to the next level. There's a lot of entry points for open source projects, for internships. And again, for internships, you can create your own opportunities. I'll give you an example for Sempre Space, the organizer behind One Space, as well as they do a lot of events management, Stratcom PR. We recently hired two young women who reached out to us on LinkedIn to let us know that they were really interested in the mission and all of the projects we had going on. And could they shadow us and learn? Because they weren't sure if they wanted to do events, but they wanted to try. So we created a shadow opportunity for them, an internship on a project, and that turned into a full-time role. So you can absolutely create opportunities for yourself. And you can define your orbit. 2 years ago, I was not in the space industry. I was barely back in the US. I had lived abroad for a long time and I worked in aviation. I thought space was totally inaccessible to me. And then I came back and I saw Cyan speak, and I got introduced to her. And then she introduced me to Loretta with Space Kind. And then Loretta introduced me to a different person. And then I went to Analog Astronaut Conference and I met Mark. And then I was at New Worlds and I met Ron. And it just domino effects from there. So, by talking about all of these things with the people in your orbit, you then get to create your own trajectory and you also get to draw opportunities to you that might not have existed otherwise. Martina, I see a question. How does one pursue what makes you feel alive in an environment with budgetary restrictions and roadblocks, especially nowadays? Great question. Now, sometimes the things that make you feel alive cost money. I want to travel the world. That costs a lot of money. So sometimes I travel the world by watching Instagram and looking at videos there, right? Because I can't do it. Well, I mean, I can, but I just can't do it every single day, right? I'm not yet at that status of income. So what I could do is I can be very intentional about learning about like why is travel inspiring? I'm learning about culture. I'm getting to experience new foods, new people, new mindsets. How can I do that in my own backyard? I live in Texas. Texas is a pretty unique state. There's also a lot of different parts of Texas. I can go and experience many different cultures just within my own state that doesn't require a lot of financial investment or a lot of time to get to, or me to require taking time off of income generating activities because I'm an entrepreneur. For those of you who work for someone else, PTO, right? Pay time off. So, how do I satisfy that? I could go and do a VR headset experience at one of the local art installations that takes me into another world and exposes me to new content and information. So there's a lot of different things that we can do there. Now, when we talk about specifically within the space roles, what are the budgetary restrictions and roadblocks that are existing, and how can we be creative in finding a different path forward? We're in a very unique environment in 2025 where funding is getting cut, different perspectives are coming into play, but just like with anything, that's going to change. So remembering that this is not a forever conversation of what's happening right now. A really great exercise to help remind you of this is to go to the New York Library. On their website, they have a function where you can look at the front page of the New York Times any day in the past. So pick May 30th, 2000, excuse me, 1905. So 120 years ago, or 1925, 100 years ago. Those headlines, I am sure you will be shocked, but they will be very, very similar to what we're seeing today. Obviously, the topics will be slightly different, but when I did this exercise last year in January 2024 for January 1st, 1924, I read about stock market crashing, recession, pandemic, vaccines, border this, war looming that, all the same things that we're facing today. So don't let what the environment is doing stop you from pursuing those things that make you alive. And if those things require funding, see how you can get creative about obtaining funding for them or being really, really intentional with your time so that you can feed those buckets rather than the things that drain you. And I see what opportunities are available for an older person, someone in their 50s with a science background. The first thing that I think of is educator. Someone with a science background who's got a lot of life experience. How can they take that science knowledge that they have and help train the next generation? How can they help mentor? How can they create maybe OJT programs where the science is really important, but the salesperson or the PR person doesn't need to be in the weeds of the science, but how can they be educated enough that when they go out and get the interview or do the podcast or make a press release, they're not giving inaccurate information that's spun in a way that sounds wonderful, but it's not entirely accurate, right? There's a lot of opportunity there where this person could be the archetype of a communicator, right? They could go back here and be the translator, especially amongst generations, making sure that we're communicating within our own organization and having the same understanding, but also within the industry. As like what Mark and Ron have done, putting this together for everyone. That's putting together all these experts so that we can share knowledge, we can educate and tell the story and connect the dots between different things. What got me started on pivoting? How did I learn to do this? Um, Well, the pivoting stems from definitely my background. I worked in business aviation, which is the private jet world. And so, I'm going to stop sharing this now so we can just be together. And in the business jet world, those aircraft are not on an airline schedule. They're not flying every day at 9 a.m. from point A to point B. They exist so that I can wake up and go, you know what? I need to go to New York for that meeting this afternoon. And I can call up the ops center and say, I want to depart at 5 p.m. And then they go and they do everything. Now, what would often happen is we'd set everything out for that flight to New York and they'd show up and then be like, oh, no, 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 we're going to Chicago. Okay, now I have to go and redo all that work, right? Within the United States, it's pretty easy. You can file a flight plan and take off in an hour. You don't need a permit for most locations or a slot. So it's very, very simple. When you go into an overseas environment, though, you need overflight permits for the countries you fly over. You might have different technical requirements in order to obtain your permit, or you might need to submit certain information. And so it's much more difficult to pivot very quickly if uh, the VIP person decides they want to change their schedule. So I had to get very familiar and comfortable with one, nothing is ever certain, things will change. Two, um, I might do a lot of work and then I have to do it all over again. So being okay with that. Three, understanding that even if I try to plan for all of the contingencies, something that I don't expect will happen, but understanding after I have done enough trips, learning what those patterns are, and obviously having my own mentors in the industry so that I could anticipate were the common pitfalls and plan for those. So it was just something that was baked into my DNA because of the nature of my job and the environment that I worked in. But I've also always been very bold and courageous. So I was very much I got on a plane to China for a 2-month trip, networked while I was there, and then that led to a job offer. So I came home and got my things and then went back over there. And I thought, maybe I'd be there a year or two. I was there for a year or two, but then I went to Hong Kong for 10 years. So, I was just open to the opportunity that didn't look like what I thought it might in the beginning. Now, I can tell you one thing. If you asked 20-year-old Sarah that was in college if I would be in the space industry or if I would have, shaved half my head and done some of the things that I've done, started my own business, I would have told you you were insane. Start my own business? Are you joking? I saw how my mom worked and she was an entrepreneur. I didn't want to have to take that risk. I was very risk adverse as a child. I was bold in my decisions for individual things and going after something that I thought was interesting, but like having to hire a team of people and be responsible for payroll and budget. And, I don't like people telling me what to do, but I have to tell myself what to do instead of, no, that was like an absolute will not ever do it. And here I am 5 years into owning my own business. So dreams can change. Your personality will adjust. Some of that is experience, some of that is maturity, and some of that is you don't know what you don't know yet. And you will discover for yourself that you have different interests. And so, allowing yourself to try new things regularly instead of getting into a rut. That's actually why a lot of people have with their health, as we age, for example, why we get more injuries, because we're only playing the same sport. We only play golf, we only run, we only go to holiday to Disney World, we only go on holiday to Italy. We just do the same thing over and over. And there's nothing wrong with that. If you know what you like, wonderful. But by exposing yourself to new things and new environments, you will be able to get a new perspective and be more open to the pivot when it lands in your lap. Because sometimes it's a forced pivot and you may not like it. You might be kicking and screaming and you might put up a fight. And then at the end of the day, you will reflect and go, you know what? That was the best thing that could have happened to me. And I know we're a couple minutes over time, and there's another session with the capstone with Frank and Gatika. So if you want to pop over there, you can. I'm also happy to stay here and answer any other questions. And feel free to come off mute. We're a small room. Don't be shy. I don't bite.
Yeah, I guess I'll go first. Like, I absolutely loved everything that you told about exploring exploring the unexplored world, and it's something which really resonates with me because so I'll introduce myself a little bit. So I'm
Yeah,
Mohtasim Saqib and I'm from Pakistan. I might be moving to Arizona soon for my undergrad in astronomy, and
amazing.
yeah, well, I love space, and I have been involved with Karachi Astronomer Society, local space organization, like outreaching for astronomy, telescope observation, and stuff. And with that, I was involved in so many other things which are like completely opposite to each other. Just 2 weeks ago, I went in a startup conference. A week before that, I was within a room of community walkers which were walking around the city talking about architecture and the whole city and history of our city.
That's amazing.
Next week I will be going on to another community walk which involves book club and like talking about a book which involves philosophy and poetry. So yeah, I thought it didn't really made a lot of sense to, to be in so many different places and like have so many different perspectives. But looking at you and like the way you made it logical and sensible, it really looked and I just had that eureka moment. God, it will help me with so many perspectives later on. So yeah, I really loved when you talked about this, and yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome. And thank you for sharing that. It's inspiring to see people exploring new things. And, I actually have a friend who he will intentionally go and explore a different community, a different type of activity, even if he doesn't think he will like it. So he will go and do that thing thinking that he's going to hate it, it's going to be boring, but he's doing it with the mindset of I will get to learn something new and see how this group of people think, how they behave. And sometimes he walks away and he goes, "Wow, that was actually so much fun." Or that was very inspiring, insightful, and now I'm going to go down this rabbit hole of, exploring this other topic. So it's just as powerful to explore things that um, you're not sure if you're interested yet. If someone invites you, or maybe even you're scrolling, you see something and you're like, that sounds interesting. I have never heard of that before, never considered it. I'm free. Why not? Right?
Yeah,
Make
I love that. It's honestly something which I've planned to do like for my whole year of college, 4 years of college, and yeah, I'm pretty excited.
Good. Yes, make the most of that for sure. Anyone else have any shares, insights, or questions that they'd like to share? Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's been a pleasure to be here with you, and thank you for the excellent questions. I will see you in the main room. And if you need to reach out to me, you just look up Sarah the Pivoter on any social or sarahkalmeta.com. You'll be able to send me a message from there. I'd love to connect and answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. It was such a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you.